Dear reader, this is a little bit of a video letter to you as a discussion on a topic of Pride and Prejudice. Why does it keep being so enjoyable? And it's kind of like a letter because I think that's partly what being on YouTube is, that it's like a letter, that this thoughts are thrown out into the open air and then comments come back, and the written comments on the video. Excuse me. The funny point is I have written this down to read to you, and I started off by calling it Price and Prejudice, which is a whole other idea for a book. But really, this has been spurred by listening to Steve Donoghue reading aloud Pride and Prejudice, one chapter per video most days. I have enjoyed it hugely. And if you haven't heard it, try listening to chapter 1, see what I mean, and see if you find yourself listening thereafter. Every day I couldn't wait to hear it, even though I have read the book many times. But I just, even though I've got a copy at home, every now and then I think, oh, I want to read that scene. And I read it, and then I keep on reading and find I'm reading the whole of the book. And here's the thing, I'm not alone in this. The BBC made a tremendous TV production in the 1990s with Andrew Davies, and he adapted the novel. And in a video interview looking back on the project some years later, he said that if he happens to switch on the TV and it's on Pride and Prejudice, his adaptation, he says, I'll just watch a little bit, and then get sucked into it and watches the whole episode. And yet he adapted it, and he's seen every single word of the book so many times rewritten. So why? What is it about this book that keeps intriguing us and pulling us back? Why? Is it like a 1950s horror movie? The book that eats your time. So here are my thoughts about it. They're just muses. I'm not an academic on the subject. Many people have written lots of books and spent years of their life. So this is just my thoughts on it as a reader, and I would be interested to hear yours in the reply in the comments below. So, Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, why does this book fascinate? I'm just going to have to say here that this is September and the lighting here is a movable feast. So I may be a movable feast as well, moving around to get the light. Anyway, we're thinking about Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, and why is it such an amazing book? And I think there's several reasons. I think there's pace, people, and places are some of the very immediate things that come to my mind. Pace. And if you look at the book, you find each chapter is just a few pages. And there's always something happening, and it's all about people. We get enough description to tell us where we are in the story, but not too much. Thomas Hardy, for example, when I read him at school, it seemed to be that he spent hours reading about hedges because he just loved that particular landscape and he just described things in immense detail. Jane gives us enough to set us the scene and we're there. The people. Chapter 1, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet are talking about their 5 daughters and a new person, new young eligible bachelor coming into the neighbourhood. So that's 8 characters. And immediately we know the Bennet family setup, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's marriage, and which of their children they prefer. So you see, immediately we see people in their relationships, not just as themselves. We know that Mrs. Bennet favours one of the daughters who's quite outrageous, and Elizabeth is a favourite of Mr. Bennet. Question, how many people are there in the story? And can we describe them if we've read the book? And I think we can, that we know who they are, what they like, what they don't like, and we could describe them in a few sentences, every single person in the book. Which is quite a lot. The places. We go to lots of locations. We're in many different homes. We're in Longbourn. We're in Netherfield Hall. We're in the Rosings, Mr. Collins's manse, Mr. Darcy's house. We're in an inn. We're at 2 dances. And key scenes take place in gardens, public dances, even very, very private conversations between Elizabeth and her sister Jane in the middle of the night. And the tone. The first sentence is so well known. It starts out like a pompous lecture and ends in a joke. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of fortune must be in want of a wife. Haha, it's a joke. And how many books do we want to read that just have the start of it is a truth universally acknowledged? If it stopped there, and there you have it. It is the Georgian equivalent of the stand-up comedian saying, have you ever noticed that? That first line is a stand-up joke. And we laugh and we begin to trust this writer. She's not going to bore us. And that's a really good trust to establish early on. She's going to be interesting. And tone is all about comedy, and that's another reason why I think the book is a winner, because there's romance, there's several couples get set up life partnerships. There are thrills, there are surprises, there's shocks, but nobody dies. Nobody is shown in stunning poverty. Everybody has enough food to eat. There are twists and turns. People seem one way and then, oh, maybe they're not like that personal persona. We discover that along with Elizabeth. And yet all these people we can easily name and have different ones we maybe like or dislike or are puzzled by. They're all figments of the imagination of one lady, Jane Austen. This whole world, it's a world building. It's a made up world. And it's come from a vicar's daughter who lived a quiet life, never married. As far as we know, she had no big romance. She hit it off with a young lawyer, and almost immediately his family packed him off to marry a wealthy woman, and that was it. So Jane wrote a happy ending that she didn't have herself. In fact, she wrote it the year after she'd met the young guy called Tom. Her readings, her understanding of life, she was reading from her father's library, and she subscribed to a lending library. But she probably found a lot of the books available to her talked about universal truth, but seriously and in depth. Experience. I think the really enjoyable thing about listening to Steve Donoghue reading us this book is a sense that it's kind of like how the book itself first developed, that Jane used to read aloud her stories to her close family, and she did this and got their audience gasp or laugh or their puzzlement, and that was how the book itself was made. So it's really lovely to go back to that and sit in a virtual circle, because we're not really seeing each other, but hearing the voice of Steve reading it out with a few little comments, highlighting the humour or questioning the characters. I think it recaptures such a lot of that feeling of being in the first audience, of hearing the book with Jane Austen, reading it fresh. And I think we can sit and listen, and somebody's going to say, oh no, but I liked him. And you maybe say it to the screen, but it would have been said in the group out loud. You get this in the comments afterwards, I guess, underneath Steve's readings. Lastly, I think the way that Jane Austen wrote the book that made it so good was that she took her time. She had to write it and rewrite it. And I think it started with a lot more epistolary. It was more like an epistolary novel, a novel told by letters, which in a way this is. This is a video letter about the book. And I think the letters in the book are astounding, carry so much information, and are so much better than some films which do an info dump or information dump, where a character will stand up and say lots of information that you need to know and it's just dumped on you, so it's called an information dump. But the effect in the book of having the letter is that you're finding out at the same time as the major characters are, in the moment, the latest news, the sudden turn, the sudden revelation. So these are some of my thoughts on Pride and Prejudice, on it being read aloud, upon the writings of Jane Austen, and why this book continues to be so fascinating. So please do respond to this video letter and leave your comments underneath the video, and I hope you've enjoyed hearing from me. Yours faithfully, Heather Gregg.